If you followed along with our most recent Top 100 series, then you would know that Arborea is actually one of my favorite games of all time. It completely took me by surprise when I first played it. I was not expecting to love it as much as I actually did, but I really did fall in love with it, and it entered my top 100 and it hasn't left since. And what's interesting is this new Arborea Corruption expansion. It introduced something that I never realized was missing from the base game. And even though I don't feel like you necessarily need this expansion to fully enjoy the base game, it would almost be hard for me to go back and play the base game without this expansion now. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel today. My name is Carly. This is Arborea Corruption. Now this upcoming expansion for Arborea actually has an upcoming crowdfunding project. So I will make sure to have all the relevant links in the description below for you this video. And it's being brought to you by Alley Cat Games again, so I wanted to give them a special shout out for sponsoring this video for you today. A rift has torn itself open in the land of Arborea, and now corruption is spreading across the land, infecting the animals and everything in this world. You will have to cleanse that corruption while still trying to create a healthy ecosystem. And you will do that by sending some of your villagers to the portal that has appeared. It is a dangerous task, but only by doing this will you contain the spread of corruption. Hopefully you have what it takes to make your ecosystem flourish. As I previously mentioned in this video, there is an upcoming crowdfunding campaign for this project. So I will make sure to have all the relevant links in the description below, but this is one of my standard preview videos, which means I will go into an overview of how this game operates and plays, kind of sharing little bits and details about what they have anticipated in this upcoming crowdfunding campaign before sharing everything that I enjoyed about this game and who I would recommend it for. So if you want to learn more about this upcoming expansion, then just keep watching. I'm excited to chat about this one. So before I dive into what this expansion offers, I am going to give you kind of a general overview of how the base game of Arborea played. Just in case you've never played it before, or maybe you have played it and it's been a while, I'm just going to do a very general idea of what's happening on this main board before I jump into all this fun expansion stuff. So the theme in the base game Arborea is actually very similar kind of to the theme in the expansion. Basically, I believe it was like a plague had broken out and scared away all the animals, and so your job was to come in, you're a patron spirit, I believe, and you're coming in and kind of growing this ecosystem back. You're attracting animals back into this land. You are growing different types of habitats, but really what's happening is there are all these tracks that you will constantly be moving on in this entire game. And there are many ways to get points, so I'll just kind of touch on a handful of kind of the main ways to get them. On a player's turn though, you have your individual player mat and you have a handful of workers. Now there are more workers that you can train throughout the game, but you do inherently start with two of these two kind of larger, these elder workers will always remain with you. The very first thing that players can choose to do is place one of their workers on a track or bump any of the tracks that are on the board. So for example, I could choose to bump that one. Now every single time a track moves, players can choose to hop their little worker off that track. The next thing that players can choose to do is activate their workers that are waiting at the top of these trails. Now, when they move through the trails, you actually move through the entire trail all the way to the end, slowly picking up every single icon that you stop on. By the time you get to the end, these workers will actually be recalled to your player board. Some are immediately ready, some you have to retrain again, but that is essentially why you are moving on these tracks, is you will place your worker on, slowly move them out. The further out the further down these tracks you go, the more better rewards that you will be able to collect as you glide kind of all the way down these. Something that you are trying to balance in the game as well is the spirit. So you can see there are certain areas that you may lose spirit, some areas that you may gain spirit, and that's all kind of depicted on this track here. The more spirit you have at the end of the game, the more points those will be worth. Something else that you're collecting from this main board though are resources, which is really, really fascinating the way that the resources are done. Essentially when you first initially gain them, so let's pretend I gained 3 of these orange here, if I spent them on my turn, then this top will move down. But if I didn't spend all of the resources that I gained on that turn, by the time my turn was over, this little bottom will actually slide all the way up, meeting this first half of the resource, and all of the points that I pass along the way I will gain immediately for that. Then this will actually remain in place, so future players actually can benefit from that. They can choose, oh, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and spend on it here, even though I didn't even though I didn't generate that, Kim generated that, but I can actually benefit from it. So the resources are super interesting in this game. Another interesting part, which this is actually the corruption overlay, so I'll just come here to the standard one, but these are the seasons tracks. This is a really big way that you score points in this game. Every single time you see this symbol, whether it's on a track or other various areas of the game, you will advance along this track, slowly getting more and more multipliers, and what you are multiplying by are the randomized items that are placed here at the top of the board. So for example, this track here, if I made it really far up this track, it would be a 6 times multiplier based on how many rocks I have in my kind of ecosystem that I'm slowly building out here. So now that we're talking about this, let's very briefly chat about what's happening here. There are many times throughout the game where you can gain these cards. There are less expensive ones going up to kind of definitely more expensive ones. These are mainly what you're going to be spending these resources on that you'll be slowly gaining throughout the game. So for example, if I had 3 coral here, I could spend it gaining the resource or the little bonuses that are at the top of the card here. But then it actually turns over into an ecosystem, which then I can place out beside my board. Now why these are important is because throughout the game there are certain areas, again, that you can activate that attract certain creatures to I think it's called like the outer lands or the borderlands. There are symbols that allow you to fully actually bring them into your enclosure area, and you can slowly build it out. And those are actually going to be worth points based on placement. So for example, if you have this pink frog here, if I had invited it to the borderlands and then I unlocked the ability that allowed me to actually bring it over into my board and place it into my area, it will actually be worth, for every pink flower area that's around it, it'll be worth 3 points at the end of the game. So that's kind of how the creatures work. Now I know that's kind of a lot of information coming at you. It actually is very, very simple and straightforward. There's just a lot of kind of symbols and things you just need to be aware of, but that's kind of generally how the base game plays. You'll be placing workers out, bumping tracks, slowly moving them down, and then when you want to move your little worker off, you can, bringing them all the way down that track, activating, collecting, whether it's resources, maybe it's attracting animals, maybe it's getting more cards. So there's a lot of chaining and stuff that happens in this game that can equate to quite a bit of points at the end of the game. So now that you kind of have a general idea of how this game plays, let's now kind of talk about the expansion and what kind of all this, what this board is over here. I also do want to mention that I was working with a prototype rules, prototype components, so everything is subject to change. There's even stuff that I received in my prototype box that I'm actually missing a handful of pieces and some other things. So just kind of be aware of that as we move forward. Again, I just want to reference you over to that upcoming crowdfunding project. It will have kind of all of the finalized idea, finalized artwork. This is a great publisher. I have no fear, no doubt in my mind that this final version is going to be just as beautiful as the base game ended up being. One of the really nice things about this expansion is it actually doesn't change the base game too much. It's essentially giving you a different board that you can go and activate as well, which was a pleasant surprise for me. I didn't feel like I was having to kind of relearn the base game or change stuff. It really just kind of adds more things on top of it. It made it really easy to dive into. So one of the new things that it offers is it actually is giving you a couple of corrupted workers. You can kind of tell they're green instead of the white or the black kind of coloring on these little guys here. And why that's important is because on your turn, I mentioned the very first thing you do is you place a worker on the track. Well, now you actually have the option to use a corrupted worker to actually come over here onto one of those outward corruption tracks like so. Now, you don't have to use these corrupted workers only on this portal world. You can actually use a corrupted worker on the main board, but then the sages are actually going to gain some corruption as well. So we'll circle back around and talk about that in a second. But just know that you can directly place your corrupted workers onto the tracks on this corruption board. You will have the opportunity later on to place your regular workers there, but again, we'll chat about that in a second. The other thing that you could choose to do when you first begin your turn is instead of placing a worker, you could just advance any one of the tracks. So when you're doing that, you could choose to advance one of these corrupted tracks instead of one of the ones on the main board. Just like the base game, the second thing you can do on your turn is activate your villagers. So if any of your villagers, either on the main board or the corrupted board, had hopped off the track, then you could actually go through and activate them. One difference between this expansion and the base game is in the base game, you can only activate 2 of your villagers. If you had any more that you wish to activate, you would just lose some spirit because of that. But now with this expansion, you can actually activate up to 3 of your workers. So if 3, I don't have 3 example here, pretend I had 3 of my guys on the tracks, I actually could go through and activate every single one of them. Bloop. Which we'll kind of talk about how this activates, but you could do that and not lose any spirit. So now that we're talking about activating the tracks, let's talk about one kind of big change that happens. I just showed you an example of I had 2 people over here and I moved them through, right? And in the normal game, these will actually come back to your player board. But now, because of this expansion, these workers, when they finish the track, your young or your veteran workers will actually be sent to the portal. So for example, these are 2 of my young ones. So they would actually be sent right here, or I'll lay it down so you can see. I'll set one right there and right here. They get sent to the portal instead of back to your player board. And just to clarify, your big workers or your elders don't actually go to the portal. They just go right back to your player board, ready to be used again as per usual. These workers on the track will operate just like the track on the main board, right? They'll slowly be kind of bumping out on this trail. When they do hop off and they move through, these icons, it operates the same way. You'll move all the way down, all the way to the end here, but let's kind of chat about what the icons do just so you're kind of aware. Lots of these icons are going to make you lose spirit, which kind of sucks, but lots of these icons are actually going to allow you to remove corruption. There are many points throughout this game where corruption, basically these little green and black bugs, are going to spread, whether onto the sages, whether onto your own little ecosystem that you're building out, or the animals also that will be you'll be attracting to the board. Lots of the animals are going to actually come with corruption now. So the way that you resolve that or get rid of that is by these spots. So for example, here, if my little young worker was moving through this area, I'd be able to remove 2 corruption from an animal or from a sage, or like a gift, one of these gift locations. Over here on this side of the board, this is where you can actually remove the corruption from your ecosystems that you're building out, which can be very, very helpful because you actually cannot place creatures out onto lands that are corrupted. Lots of the cards that come into play as well also will have quite a bit of corruption on them. So that's primarily kind of what this board does, is it allows you to clear the corruption that will inevitably be spreading across the game. When you do reach the end of this path though, the final thing that's going to activate, instead of just immediately returning to your board, is this little center wheel is going to activate. Everybody has one little worker on this path, kind of indicating where they're at. And based on the worker that just completed the trail, this is a non-corrupted young worker, my sage will move 1 spot. If the villager was a corrupted villager, then your little sage would actually move 2 spots. And you will gain all of the rewards that you pass on if you have a gift on those locations. So if I had previously collected these gifts out, then I would be able to gain those rewards. Some of these gifts can be really helpful, such as, again, reducing corruption or gaining spirit, but this one at the very top here is really interesting. This is where you actually can gain a magnificent creature. Now, there should actually be 4 creatures that are laid out, just the way the board and everything. I just laid out 3. Now, these creatures are quite a bit different than the creatures that come in the base game. These actually give you individual ways of scoring that are different from other people around the table, because everybody, no matter all the animals, will score the same way across the board in the base game, but these are different. For example, if I was able to claim this little fox, big-eared fox thing, I would get 6 points per direction on its row and column with no other creature. So all these are going to, there's a ton of different animals, they're all going to activate in different ways, but you'll get this card. If I am able to actually place it into an ecosystem, then I will be able to gain these kind of bonus cards that are, again, different for everybody around the table. So that's essentially how the activating works. You will then go ahead and update the kind of the resources board over here, potentially getting points from that as per usual with the base game. You can also complete your ecosystem cards at this point, and again, if you have any remaining corruption on those and you complete it, those corruption, it will actually carry over when you place it into your area. You still have ways to get rid of them, but you definitely don't want corruption because, as you'll see next, you won't be able to really place animals on that. And then the final thing you're going to do on your turn is actually advance all of the tracks that have your own villagers on them, including the ones over here on the portal board, so everything is going to move. If you're familiar with the base game Arborea, then everything that I just explained should kind of make sense instinctually. The gameplay really does feel very similar. Really what you are trying to stay on top of really the entire game is this corruption that really will be spreading. Every single time a creature comes into play, corruption is going to be added. You'll be corrupting the sages and the gifts that you can potentially get. The corruption is going to be spreading and really affecting how you are building out your biomes, which then is going to greatly affect your points. And then something else I didn't quite touch on, but this little track here is actually quite more punishing, quite more punishing than just the base game track. So in the base game, everything is just a straight up multiplier. The further up these tracks you get, the better. But with this overlay, there's actually quite a bit amount of negative points that you can get. All of these red spots here are actually going to turn into negative points against you if your spot, for example, if you landed here, this is a 3 times multiplier, but it's going to be negative points instead of positive. So you kind of feel like you are getting, I don't want to say beat up on because that's not the right word. It's definitely more of a challenge with this expansion. So I wouldn't necessarily describe this as a hard game. There's just kind of a decent amount you have to think about. There's a lot of different paths to victory, a lot of different things. So hopefully my kind of this general overview that I'm giving you kind of gives you an idea of what this expansion is offering. I mentioned at the beginning of the video how it would be almost interesting for me now to play just the base game without this corruption, because I was so pleasantly surprised at how much that corruption kind of brought to the table. I never felt the base game was lacking at all. It just kind of felt like this slow build. You were slowly just kind of getting these points, slowly trying to chain and get the most combo-tastic. Okay, if I go here, then that allows me to lock this ability, which then I can kind of bounce off of for this next future. It was all positive. I guess that's the only really way I know how to describe it. And so to have this expansion that now brings in this corruption, something you are actively trying to fight against and something that's actively potentially pulling down points, it's blocking you from these ideal placements that were so easy to get in the first game. I loved working around that. And then another interesting thing is it introduced more of a balancing act with your workers, because now, other than your 2 elder workers that you will always have, right? They'll never go into this portal. But all of your younger and your veteran workers, once they're done, you're not only waiting for them now on the tracks, but then once they're done, they actually will go to this portal board, which then involves a longer waiting process. So it gives you a more interesting dynamic in regards to balancing your workers. And I really did love these majestic creatures. I thought these were so fun. So my game only came with a handful of meeples for these characters, but I believe the base game is going to have a different meeple for every single one of these creature cards. Like, look how cool they are. And there's so many different ways to score points with them and kind of to maximize your points, which again, it wasn't something that I ever felt the base game lacked. I never thought that, but now after playing with it, it's like, no, of course I want to have different ways for my opponents to score points. I'm all about that. And then this scoring track over here too really changed stuff up a lot, because it was more punishing. It was very punishing, right? When you compare it to this first game where every little bit I moved, it was like, okay, I'm getting better. But now some of these tracks, especially, I move up one, it's like, okay, do I really want to take the risk of bumping up one more time to hope I can bump up again before the game ends? Because if I don't, that is going to be a lot of negative points that are against me. I found that so interesting as well. I think this is something else I already mentioned, but I don't think that this game is essential for you to enjoy Arborea. I love the base game Arborea in and of itself. I think it is a fantastic crunchy, kind of combo-y, trying to set yourself up, timing, just a really interesting timing element to this game that I really haven't quite found any other game that kind of scratches this itch for me. However, if you have played Arborea and you inherently like it, and maybe you have played it a handful of times and maybe you're looking for a slightly new experience, I would absolutely recommend this expansion. I think everything it does, it makes this game, it gives it that interesting touch that, again, I didn't feel like the base game lacked, but now playing with it, I don't think I could ever play this game without it now, honestly. I just love having that separate element that you are constantly trying to fight against with everything else that you're already doing. Now you've got something else you have to fight against. And I just found that balancing really interesting. I truly believe that if you played the base game Arborea and loved it, I think you would equally love this expansion. It is interesting because this is actually fully incorporate, like you can incorporate this with, I know there was like was it Deep Waters expansion? There was some expansion that came with the base game of the Kickstarter version at least, which I know you can get separately, but then you also can fully incorporate this solo. Like it feels like it fits really well with the base game. Nothing about it feels tacked on. Nothing about it feels, oh, you know what, this doesn't really fit. It really does fit, and it incorporates nicely, and it just gives you an extra level of complexity on top of Arborea. So if everything that I just mentioned seems or sounds like something that you would be interested in, again, I just want to reference you over to that crowdfunding page that should be live soon, very soon at the time of posting this video. I will have all of the relevant links in the description below for this video. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today as we talk about this brand new expansion for Arborea. Again, I wanted to give a special shout out to Alley Cat Games and thank them for sponsoring this video for you today. And again, please like, please subscribe, please do all the good stuff to support me because I would really appreciate it. But until next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and we'll see you later.